In this video, we're going to study firm behavior. In this lecture, we're going to cover market structure, monopoly and imperfect competition as particular forms of market structure. We're going to use this to build what we call firm behavior, and then we're going to look at how firm behavior tells us about price setting. So let's open with a question. We have some professional teams that don't sell out every single game. Let's take a look at the Texas Rangers. So the Texas Rangers used to play in Rangers Ballpark in Arlington, sort of a classic, little bit of a throwback design of a stadium. And it had some capacity changes, but for the time period we're going to look at, it had a capacity of about 49,000 seats. So if we look here from 2006 to 2016, kind of roughly the golden era for the Texas Rangers, sort of the first time that that franchise was really good at baseball, we can kind of see what happened with their attendance and their attendance per game. So notice they've got these different names here. These are all the same stadium. It just was renamed a few times. You'll notice that it said the ballpark in Arlington, AmeriQuest, Rangers Ballpark in Arlington, and so on. I'm getting this information from the Baseball Almanac, and it seems like it wasn't updated prior to the 2014 season. Okay, so the Rangers start out, and they're kind of decent team, hovering around 500, 2006, 7, 8, and 9. And then they really break through in 2010, right? And their attendance is sort of hovering around, 2 million ticket sales per year. And that's a very solid middle of the pack kind of number. You can see they're 7th out of 14 AL teams, 8th, 11th, 8th, and so on. They then go on to have a good season in 2010, losing in the World Series, and they get 2.5 million. Now, one of the things that happens, and you can kind of see it here, right, is there's a lag. If a team is really good in a particular year, and notice they were quite good in 2009, the next season kind of bumps up year over year, right? So even though they kind of have a down year in 2014, their attendance is still really high because you're coming off of these really excellent 90-plus win seasons here, right? So what happens? Well, the Rangers build up. That 3 million mark is really an important mark. That's a very strong, that's what's considered kind of a benchmark for a good year of ticket sales, a good year of attendance for an MLB team over their regular season, right? So their maximum possible attendance is this 49,000 times their 81 games, so about 3.9, almost 4 million ticket sales per season. You can see they don't quite get that at their peak. The very highest they get is about 87% utilization rate, right? So this team just doesn't sell out a lot of its games. We see lots of baseball games being played with less than full attendance, less than a sellout. Now, there's a few exceptions to that, but most baseball stadiums, this is the trend. Obviously, the two big obvious exceptions to this are Fenway in Boston and Wrigley in Chicago, because they have relatively small stadiums, right? They're not around this 50,000 in capacity number, and so they tend to sell out pretty much all the time. Okay, so we've got this sort of puzzling question. Why would it be that professional teams are not going to sell out every game? It seems like this should just be an obvious thing that happens is professional teams sell every ticket. They move the prices around however needed based on the different popularities of each individual game that they might face. Well, to understand that, we have to understand market structure. We sort of dipped our toe into market structure by talking about supply and demand and competition. But market structure is really a reference to competition and different types of competition. Sort of the base model is what we call perfect competition. This is the most competitive market that we can have. And if you remembered, we said in the previous video when we were looking at what assumptions are being made and what gives us the most competition, this is what I mean. It's what we call perfect competition. Okay, so there's several things here that are components of perfect competition, and that is many buyers and sellers, homogeneous product, low market power. These are kind of the three core elements, and we've talked about the first two before, so I'll go a little bit more quickly. right? Many buyers and sellers. The first question is, how many is many? And the answer is, many buyers and sellers is when the individual competitors on each side of the market, buying and selling, are price takers. They don't get to set the price, right? One of the things that we'd like to have students take away when, as professors of economics, is this idea that prices aren't arbitrary. I think people have this notion in their head, right, that prices are set by whoever's selling things and they just pick whatever number out of the air, right? But let's think about it for a moment. Suppose I wanted to sell my house. I have a $300,000 house, 4-bed, 2-bath, 2,000 square foot in a nice neighborhood, right? It's just the most average standard house you're going to find in the Amarillo housing market, right? And it's my wife painted the door purple, right? And so it's got this thing that stands out about it. And I say, you know what? I'm going to sell it for $500,000. I can do that, right? And in the sense that prices are arbitrary, I can pick any price that I want. What's going to happen? Well, say some couple comes along and they see the house and they just love the purple door, right? But they go, well, I can get this other house that's pretty similar, 4-bed, 2-bath, 2,000 square feet, on and on and on, nice neighborhood. It's very similar, but it just doesn't have a purple door. And I could buy that one for $300,000, right? You see how the competition will penalize me for setting a price that doesn't make sense. Well, as long as we have many buyers and many sellers, that is what's going to happen, right? In markets where that's not true, where there's only one buyer, where there's only one seller, where there's very low amount of competition, all of a sudden these kind of things they're more complex, right? I don't want to say this just goes away. But prices are not set arbitrarily. If you go into a store and you look and you say, I'm here, I want to buy a bucket of popcorn at the movie theater. Why is that $10? It's not because those people are evil, right? It's because the market is dictating something about that. Okay? So price takers, we're not setting the price, the market is setting the price. The next thing is homogeneous product, right? And that is when goods that are being sold in the market are the same. We don't have highly differentiated product, and that gives us elastic demand. That means the main thing that we're competing on in the market as sellers is the price, right? If the products are different, then we can compete on all number of things, right? If we're thinking about the market for cars, there's the price, there's the safety, there's the gas efficiency, there's the style, there's the colors, there's the add-ons, on and on and on. There's lots of things that we're competing on. If we're buying a commodity, if I'm buying 1,000 tons of steel, right, what do I care about? I just care about the price. So highly elastic demand means that if the price is above the market price, you sell nothing. If the price is at the market price or below, you basically can sell as much as you can produce in that market, right? Okay, the third one, and this is the one that's kind of new to us, is low market power. And low market power has to do with the barriers to entry. And different markets have different types of barriers to entry. Many of them are legal, right? Trademarks, property rights, etc., to where you can't just go into any market that you want. Good examples of this would be electrical production or oil refining, right? There's high regulatory barriers. I can't just open up a refinery in my backyard, and so that gives very high market power to these kind of firms. Now, oil refining is a good example, right? Because it has a very high capital demand and a very high level of required human capital in its labor, right? So if we're talking about a lemonade stand, there are low laws, there's very low capital, the labor is not a highly sophisticated labor, pretty much anybody can do it. And so the barriers to entry for a lemonade stand in the summer, they're just almost zero. Whereas if I imagine I can figure out how to navigate all the regulatory stuff. Still think about how hard it is to get into oil refining, right? Enormous plant and refinery that I have to build. I have to have a tremendous amount of concrete and metal organized in specific, very technical ways. And I have to have people that understand that and can build that and run that, right? That is going to give us very high barriers to entry. So what we're saying in perfect competition, there are low barriers to entry which give us very low market power, right? So the people that are competing in this market, they're taking the prices, they're sensitive to price, and they're not able to manipulate the price. And if there are misalignments, between the price and sort of what the market dictation would be, that changes very quickly because low market power means firms can come in and out of the market very quickly. The upshot of that is we get this, that profit is zero. Now, in economics, we sort of have this little bit unusual way to think about profit, and we call this a normal profit, where it accounts for your opportunity cost, right? So accounting profit just says, well, what's our revenue minus what's our cost? That's our profit. And this is a good way to think about profit. But what we're saying is add in that cost section your opportunity cost. If I weren't running a refinery, what else would I be doing, right? Perhaps I would be a race car driver. Well, how much could I make driving race cars? Well, the difference between that is going to be equal to the amount of profit that I would make in this market, right? And so people with very high opportunity costs, they will go do something else. People with lower opportunity costs, meaning their comparative advantage is in this case, refining, right, are going to compete in this particular market. So that's what I mean by profit is zero. Okay, so that's perfect competition, but we can still, now we can sort of take this model, think of that as like an ideal market, the most competitive market we can get. It's like batting 1,000. It's not going to happen, but you can conceptualize it, right? Instead, we have these forms of imperfect competition, one of which is monopoly. And in these, we change up some of those things. Those homogeneous goods that we had before, now we're saying, no, let those be differentiated. In some markets, the goods are very, very similar, right? The wheat market, the steel market, like we've talked about before, those goods really are not very differentiated. But we can have all kind of differentiated product. You interact with mostly differentiated products. We talked about cars. Think about shoes or other fashion items, like restaurants, right? They're all trying to have something different that they're selling you, right? We can think about this in the context of sports, right? Let's think about substitutes then. So what happens is, in a homogeneous market, everything is a perfect substitute for another. You can't tell the wheat from farm A apart from the wheat from farm B. In non-homogeneous markets, different people are selling different things. Let's consider what some sports teams are selling. Let's think about the Colorado Rockies. Do they have substitutes? Well, yes, they do actually have some substitutes, right? During the season, a substitute for the Colorado Rockies might be the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now, that's an imperfect substitute, right? Because it is Major League Baseball, but it's played in a city, several hundred miles away. And so if you're living in the Denver area, you're consuming a different product when you're consuming the Rockies than you are the Diamondbacks. Those are similar. They're definitely substitutes, but they're not perfect substitutes. What gets defined as a substitute also depends on the market scope. It depends on how we define it. So if we define what product are the Rockies selling, if we define the market very narrowly, we say Major League Professional Baseball played in Denver, Colorado. It's just the Rockies. That's the only thing. There's no substitutes. As we open up that scope, we can see different things. For example, what if we define it as professional sports? Well, then you count the Denver Nuggets, Denver Broncos, and the Colorado Avalanche. We've got lots of potential competition. Now, are they perfect substitutes? No, obviously not, because these teams are not playing at the same time. There's some overlap, but generally they're not playing at the same time. They're not playing the same sport, and so you might dramatically prefer baseball to basketball or football or hockey and so on, right? Alternatively, we can think about it the other way around. There is professional baseball that is being played during the summer at the same time as the Rockies, but it's just a league down. A good example of this is the minor league team that's in Colorado Springs, right? But that's, again, a different product. There's different popularity. You're going to be able to see different style and kind of baseball being played. You're going to see minor leagues in recent years have trended toward sort of being a little bit, taking themselves a little bit less seriously. You go to a professional baseball game, you go to Major League Baseball, right? It's the top level of baseball. It's very serious. These people really care about what's going on. We go to minor league baseball and there's silly bat races and there's goofy mascots and on and on. Okay, even broader, we might just think of entertainment as a substitute for the Rockies. My option is Friday night, I can go to the Rockies game, or I can what? I could go to the aquarium, I could go to a movie, I could go to a restaurant or a bar, right? And Denver has all of these things, and so we can see lots of different substitutes. So there's still competition here, but it's just much less direct than we were seeing. Therefore, it's somewhat weaker. The upshot of that is it gives the professional teams some market power. Not unlimited, but it gives them some market power. Now, the other one that obviously changes a lot is barriers to entry. The barriers to entry in professional sports are extraordinarily high. Literally, leagues are designed to limit the entry. They only add teams every so often, and most leagues haven't added teams in decades and probably have no plan to do so. So the barriers to entry are extremely high. That gives more market power. So the Rockies, because they're facing less direct substitutes, less competition, they have more market power because there are high barriers to entry to compete with them. They actually do have some power to set their prices. Okay, so how is it that a firm sets its price? This will be kind of familiar to you, hopefully, but I'm just going to go through the basic idea of profit maximization. So a team can then choose a price, right? They can choose a price. And how might they choose prices? Well, one of the ways that they can choose a price is they can start by setting sort of a high price, right? And let's just say P1. But they still face a demand curve, right? And hold on to that idea because we're going to see that again. And so if they set a high price, then they're going to get a relatively low quantity demanded from their consumers. So what happens here? Well, if they set the price high, there's a certain amount that consumers want, and that gives them a very low marginal cost right here at this to produce that much, right? So we're just talking about firms in general. And we can see that the marginal revenue is much higher than the marginal cost. What that conveys to the producer is if I lower my if I lower my price, if I produce more and lower the price in order that I could sell more units, remember demand downward sloping, then the marginal revenue that I will get, the additional revenue that I will get, more on that in a moment, is higher than the additional cost to produce. That's what marginal cost and marginal revenue, that's what they mean, right? So if I lower my price, and I'm going to pick this place carefully, right? Because if I'm here, right, and I move this way, as long as up until this point here, marginal revenue is always higher than marginal cost, okay? So at this point, and this corresponding price 2, I'll sell quantity 2, and at this point we have a very important thing, which is marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. And what this does, it says if we are anywhere to the left of that, then we could get more profit because we would get more revenue for selling another unit than it cost us to make it. Very straightforward logical idea. What happens if I move the price even lower, and I'm like, well, if I sell more, some is good, more is better, right? And so I lower the price and I move the way out here. We go to Q3. Well, in this case, right, the marginal revenue that we got is much lower than the marginal cost. What happens if something costs me more to make than I get in revenue from it? I'm losing money in this case, okay? So what we learned here is profit maximization happens at marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. Marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. That's our profit maximization. Okay. Very important idea. Okay. So if a team doesn't have any good substitutes, they should be able to charge high prices, right? Well, one thing we just saw is that demand is downward sloping, and as a consequence, demand disciplines the market. Let's work it out with numbers, since what I just did on the graph really is this idea, but it can help us to think about it if we work through some numbers, right? So let's say we have an option. Option 1 is we sell 2 million tickets at $10. So if we set the price at $10 on average, just for simplicity's sake, let's say all the tickets are the same, right? I set the price at $10, I can sell 2 million tickets. And if I drop the price to $8, I can sell 3 million tickets in a season, right? Well, to help us understand how it is that demand disciplines the market, we want to go back to that idea of marginal revenue. And marginal revenue is our change in revenue from selling an additional unit of a product. How does that look? Well, we take all the new tickets, the tickets that we didn't sell before, times the price we were able to sell, plus all the tickets we were already selling, I'll call those the old tickets, times the change in the price. Okay, so how many new tickets? Well, we sold 3 million when we sold 2 million before, right? So that's 1 million new tickets times the new price, which is $8. All the old tickets, the tickets that we were selling before anyways, times the change in the price. And this is the kicker, right? Because we had to lower the price in order to induce more sales. So if, this is 2006 and this is 2007, right? Then those 2 million I sold before at 10, now I'm only selling them at 8. So I actually lose some money there on those sales. Well, 1 million tickets times $8 is 8 million. The 2 million tickets minus the difference we had to do in order to induce the new $1 million in sales is 4. We get a marginal revenue of 4. Now that might be a little counterintuitive, so let's look at the math. If I sell 2 million tickets at $10 a piece, I have 20 million in revenue, right? If I sell 3 million tickets at $8 a piece, just like we said here, then I get 24 million. Turns out our calculation on marginal revenue exactly right. We make $4 million more because we had to lower the price of the previous tickets in order to sell them, to sell more tickets, right? This logically can just continue. Let's say we wanted to try to get to 4 million tickets, and so we lowered the price to 6. Well, actually, that's zero marginal revenue because it's also $24 million. Let's say we just kept going. So we lowered another $2 per ticket to sell 5 million tickets. We're back to 20 million in revenue. Marginal revenue can actually be negative. Okay, so we've talked about marginal revenue. Now, let's talk about marginal cost. Okay, marginal cost is the change in cost from producing an additional unit, right? So we're producing a certain set of units. We have a certain amount of total cost. However much our cost goes up when we want to produce another unit, that's marginal cost. Now, what's interesting, in the context of a stadium, marginal cost is constant up to the capacity. It's constant up to the capacity. That is, admitting another fan is zero cost until our capacity is reached, and then it goes up very, very rapidly, right? So when I sell this ticket, this ticket, this ticket, this ticket, so on, right? When I let the first fan in the stadium, I let the second fan in the stadium, did my cost go up? No, because the stadium's already built. So basically what this curve shows us is that idea of the stadium has this upper bound, okay? Now it's a little bit stylized, right? Because here I've drawn the curve straight up, right? So it's like we get to capacity, whatever this quantity is, and then the cost just goes to infinite, right? So that's a little bit stylized, right? Because we have standing room only. We might be able to add a few seats or here or there, but it's pretty close to how stadiums actually work. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Texas Rangers partner there in Arlington, and that's the Dallas Cowboys, right? So if we look at the same time period, 2006 to 2016, we can kind of look at the Cowboys attendance numbers. And the Cowboys attendance numbers during this time period are really just fantastical, right? So before 2009, when they built the new AT&T Stadium, the Cowboys were still in Texas Stadium, right? A classic, well-known stadium. And they typically had pretty much bottom of the league attendance, right? So their total attendance is around 500,000 every season, ranking them 26th and 25th out of 32 teams. They're averaging right at 63,000 per game, and that's with a stadium capacity of 65,000. So they're still basically selling out every game. So remember what we're saying. The Rangers' best number, they come off of back-to-back World Series appearances. They're one of the best teams in the league. Their highest attendance ever, they get to like 87% capacity. Whereas the Cowboys are selling out games left and right. These are the kind of numbers you get when you sell out 7 games and you have one game where you don't quite sell out, right? The Cowboys then build AT&T Stadium going into the 2009 season. Their attendance jumps up to about 700,000, and it's actually gone even higher sort of the end of this period. And they actually average more capacity than what is technically listed. So what happens is AT&T is obviously a newer stadium. They kind of have some unusual things there. They can actually go up to a capacity of 100,000. But by the way, a percentage of capacity is reckoned, they actually have over 100%. I mean, they're selling out every game, basically, right? You look at this, you're saying, okay, there's 80,000, which is the largest stadium capacity in the NFL at the time, right? And they're averaging over 80 up into 90,000 per season. Okay, so what does this look like? Well, is it that the Rangers are irrational and the Cowboys are brilliant? Well, what it turns out is this is just a profit maximizing behavior. What price should the Cowboys set their tickets at? Well, marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. And then once we've determined that, we set the price based on the demand curve. Remember your principle of micro class, right, where we develop this idea that the demand curve shows the willingness to pay. And so we can retrieve our price quantity relationship from there, and that quantity is right here at capacity, or in the Cowboys case, maybe even slightly more than capacity, right? And the Cowboys could set the price any number of places, right? So they could set the price even higher, right? And then they could have this kind of scenario. But what happened? Well, now our marginal revenue is much higher than our marginal cost, and so by lowering the price, we can sell more tickets, we can make a higher profit, right? So this is, I'll just call this the high price quantity, right? They could also lower the price, and then they could try something like price 3, right? And they could come out here, and they could do something like this, right? Let me make that just, like this. And what do we see here at quantity low price? We see that the marginal revenue, which would have to be extended just a little bit, bear with me. The marginal revenue would intercept that price over here, right? And the marginal cost is way beyond capacity, right? It's not feasible for that to happen. So the marginal cost is way higher than marginal revenue. They'd have to be adding on the stadium is the kind of idea that we're showing here. Okay. What about the Rangers? The Rangers have sort of maybe even more of an interesting situation. There's marginal revenue equal to marginal cost there. So what price do they charge? They charge a price that looks like this, and that's their profit maximizing quantity, right? Now they have lots of options, right? They could sell out. And they could do that by lowering the price and going to price 2. And what would happen in this case, again, I'm going to extend the marginal revenue curve so you guys can see this, right? The quantity here and the marginal revenue way down here. So what happened? We're saying the marginal cost is way up here and the marginal revenue is way down here. They lose much more doing that because all of this, just like I showed in that example, the marginal revenue is negative, right? Alternatively, they could charge a much higher price, right? But we've already shown why that is not a very good idea. So why is it that the Texas Rangers don't sell out every game? The answer is based on the location of the demand curve and their marginal revenue that's associated with, it's not profit maximizing to do so, right? If the demand curve shifted way over here, right, it would then sort of both the marginal revenue and the demand intercept the marginal cost curve, and it would make sense for the Rangers to sell out every time, right? We can imagine, actually, if we did want to do this really quickly, we can imagine what it looks like for the Red Sox, right? Like we were saying, there's a really low capacity stadium, and so when you draw a marginal revenue and demand curve for them, they intercept over here, and this price sells out all the time. Whereas if they had maybe a more higher capacity stadium, perhaps their marginal cost would look something like this, and it wouldn't make sense for them to sell out. Now, they would end up with something like this. And so they would end up not selling out based on the exact same demand curve, right? So marginal cost for Fenway, marginal cost for new stadium, something like that, right? And we could imagine exactly how it is that the interaction between the popularity of the team is expressed in the demand curve versus the capacity of the stadium tells us whether or not it makes sense to sell out. And we might not want to sell out sometimes as a team because it's not profit maximizing to do so. Okay, so let's look at one last question sort of similarly related to this, and this is a fallacy that sports economists like to attack, and this is the idea that salaries raise ticket prices, right? So you'll see this article, Bryce Harper signs for $300 million, and now Phillies ticket prices are going to go through the roof. And that's not how this works, and we kind of understand it already because we've already seen this idea that sports contracts, especially in baseball, are guaranteed, and salaries are fixed costs. What does this mean? It means that the total cost goes up, but the player is paid a contract, and it's not related to the output, the number of games that they end up playing. As a consequence, the marginal cost doesn't change, right? So the only way that ticket prices go up is if that player increases the popularity of the game, right? And so if we were here in this low demand situation, we would still have the same thing: marginal revenue, marginal cost. We retrieve and the price would stay the same because the marginal cost wouldn't move around. Just like we saw with the Red Sox, if for whatever reason, the cost per producing each game got higher somehow, right? So maybe it looked something weird like this, that would change what the ticket prices would end up being. On the other hand, if it increased the popularity of the game, then yeah, before they weren't selling out, now they're over here, they are selling out, right? That would increase the prices. But this is, of course, not what is meant by the articles that you read. The articles are trying to imply, oh, the costs of producing are going up, therefore the ticket prices. Now that we understand, right, that it's the interaction between marginal revenue and marginal cost, and the marginal costs are not changing because salaries are fixed cost, we understand that it's not the cost side of things that might change the prices. The only way that would happen is if the player turns out to be very good and or very popular, the team starts winning because of the better roster construction, and the popularity goes up, which is, of course, a good thing for the fans.